in the heart of New York City, within the velvet-draped walls of a restaurant where a single meal costs more than a month's rent, a night of quiet opulence was about to be shattered. The target, billionaire Harrison Vance, a man who bought and sold futures, both on the market and of men's lives. The aggressors, a team of ghosts who moved with the precision of a scalpel. They planned for everything, the security, the exits, the silence. But they didn't plan for her. The quiet waitress in the corner, the one they dismissed with a glance. They were about to learn that her apron hid more than just a notepad and pen. It concealed a past written in gunpowder and shadow, and her training was about to become their final, shocking lesson. The air in l'Orangerie was thick with the scent of money and truffle oil. It was an exclusive pocket of Manhattan, a place where conversations were conducted in hushed tones, but the deals whispered across the starched white tablecloths could topple governments. Crystal glasses, so fine they seemed to hum with a life of their own, reflected the soft, golden light from chandeliers that dripped with expensive brilliance. Each plate was a canvas, each meal a masterpiece, and each patron a titan of industry, art, or inheritance. Among them, serving a delicate seared foie gras with a fig reduction, was a woman who moved with an economy of motion that bordered on invisibility. Her name tag read Anna, a name as plain and forgettable as her neat brown ponytail and her simple, well-pressed black uniform. Anna, or as she was known in a life she had meticulously buried, Eva Petrova, was an expert in fading into the background. Here, among the city's elite, she was just another part of the seamless service, her polite smile a perfect mask for the hypervigilance that coiled in her gut. Her senses were always on, a switch that had been flipped years ago and could never be turned off. She didn't just hear the gentle clink of silverware. She catalogued it, noting the rhythm, the occasional nervous tremor of a hand, the sharp rap of a knife handle on a plate signaling impatience. She didn't just see the patrons, she observed them. The couple in the corner booth, their smiles not reaching their eyes, a deal gone sour. The woman dining alone, her gaze flitting towards the door every 10 seconds, waiting for a lover who was either late or not coming. Tonight, her focus was drawn to Table 7, the restaurant's most coveted spot, nestled in a secluded alcove with a panoramic view of the city lights. Its occupant was Harrison Vance, a man whose face was a regular feature on the covers of Forbes and Fortune. He was a tech billionaire, the architect of a global surveillance software called OmniSight that had made him unimaginably wealthy and terrifyingly powerful. Vance was sharp-featured and impeccably dressed in a custom suit that probably cost more than her entire apartment. He radiated an aura of supreme confidence that bordered on contempt for the world he so thoroughly dominated. Flanking the entrance to the alcove, attempting to look casual but failing miserably, was Vance's bodyguard. Robert was a mountain of a man, poured into a suit that strained at the seams. He had the classic ex-Secret Service look, an earpiece, a noticeable bulge under his left arm, and eyes that constantly scanned the room. But Ava saw the flaws in his vigilance. He was predictable. His scan pattern was a lazy figure eight. He was too focused on the main entrance, and he held his right hand too close to his jacket, a dead giveaway of his readiness to draw his weapon. He was a deterrent, not a defense. Ava refilled Vance's water glass, her movements smooth and silent. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Vance?" she asked, her voice a placid, professional murmur. Vance didn't even look at her. He was scrolling through something on a slim, encrypted tablet, his thumb moving with sharp, impatient flicks. "The 2005 Chateau Margaux, and tell your sommelier not to dawdle." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, as if swatting at a fly. Ava simply nodded. "Of course, sir." As she retreated, she allowed her gaze to sweep the room one more time. It was then that she felt it, a subtle shift in the restaurant's delicate ecosystem, a faint dissonance in the symphony of quiet elegance. It started at the entrance. The maître d', a famously unflappable man named Mr. Dubois, was greeting a party of 4 men. But his posture was stiff, his welcoming smile frozen into a painful grimace. The men were dressed in expensive dark suits that fit them a little too well, the kind of tailoring that screamed off the rack but was designed to conceal tactical gear underneath. They didn't look like the usual patrons. They lacked the easy, relaxed arrogance of old money or the boisterous self-importance of the newly rich. They moved with a synchronized, predatory grace, their eyes not admiring the decor, but mapping the space, exits, sightlines, threats. Ava's blood ran cold. She had seen men like that before, in the dusty alleys of Damascus and the rain-slicked streets of Berlin. They were not here for the food. Her heart rate, normally a placid 60 beats per minute, kicked up to 70, then 80. Her training screamed at her, synapses firing with a speed she had long suppressed. 1 at the door, 2 flanking, 1 leader. Check hands. No visible weapons? Check reflections in the mirrored columns. The 2 flankers have subtle bulges at the small of their backs. The leader is clean, but he's the danger. It's always the quiet one. She slipped behind a service partition, her body shielded from the main dining room. From this vantage point, she could observe without being seen. The leader of the group, a man with chillingly calm grey eyes and a face that was a composite of forgotten features, spoke to Mr. Dubois in a low voice. The maître d' nodded jerkily, his face pale. Then, the first man turned and discreetly pressed a small device to the restaurant's main door. A soft click echoed, almost imperceptible over the string quartet playing softly in the background. The magnetic lock. They were sealing the room. Ava's hand instinctively tightened around the heavy silver tray she was holding. Her mind became a schematic of the restaurant. 2 exits in the main dining room, both now compromised. 1 exit through the kitchen in the back, 1 service elevator to the basement. 4 hostiles, 32 patrons, 6 staff members, including herself, and 1 billionaire target. The odds were appalling. The life she had built here, the quiet, anonymous sanctuary of Anna the waitress, was about to be burned to the ground. The ghost she thought she had buried was clawing its way back to the surface. And as the leader's grey eyes swept the room and settled, for a brief, terrifying moment, on the alcove at table 7, Ava knew that the gilded cage of l'orangerie was about to become a slaughterhouse. The shift from civility to terror was executed with breathtaking speed and silence. There was no shouting, no crashing of glass. The leader, who Ava would later come to know only as Cain, raised his hand in a simple, precise gesture. It was a signal. Instantly, his 3 men moved. One of them approached Robert, Vance's bodyguard, from his blind spot. Robert was focused on the leader, Cain, who was now walking calmly toward table 7. He failed to notice the second man until it was too late. There was a swift, chopping motion to the side of Robert's neck, a sickeningly soft thud as his large body collapsed, expertly caught before it could make a sound on the plush carpet. The third man was already at the kitchen doors, blocking the only other visible exit, his hand inside his jacket. Simultaneously, a low-frequency hum filled the room. The patrons stirred, looking at their phones. No signal. A cellular jammer. It was a professional's touch, designed to sow confusion and prevent any calls for help. Panic began to bubble beneath the surface of the room's refined composure. A woman gasped. A man started to rise from his chair, only to be met with the cold, unblinking stare of the man at the kitchen door. He sat back down. Cain arrived at table 7, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who owned not just the room, but the very air within it. He looked down at the unconscious bodyguard, his expression unreadable. Then he turned his attention to Harrison Vance. Vance, who had been engrossed in his tablet, finally looked up, his face a mask of annoyance that was slowly morphing into confusion and fear. "What is the meaning of this? Who are you?" he demanded, his voice accustomed to being obeyed. Cain pulled a chair from an adjacent table and sat down opposite the billionaire, his movements fluid and relaxed. He didn't seem to be armed. He placed his hands on the table, palms down. "My name is irrelevant, Mr. Vance," he said, his voice calm, level, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was more chilling than any shout. "This isn't a robbery. I'm not interested in your watch or the money in your wallet. I'm here for something far more valuable." Vance's eyes darted around the room, taking in the controlled scene, the blocked exits, the neutralized bodyguard, the terrified silence of the other diners. His bravado began to crumble, replaced by the raw fear of a man who had lost control for the first time in his life. "What do you want?" he stammered. "The Prometheus key," Cain said, the name dropping into the silence like a stone in a deep well. Ava, still concealed behind the service partition, felt a jolt. The Prometheus key. It wasn't public knowledge. It was a piece of whispered Black Ops legend, a next-generation encryption device rumored to hold the master source code and, more importantly, the unredacted operational logs for Vance's Omnisite program. It was the key to his entire empire, the ledger of every morally ambiguous contract, every corner cut, every life ruined in the name of security and profit. This wasn't industrial espionage. This was something deeper, more personal. Vance's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about," he lied, but his trembling hands betrayed him. His gaze flickered for a nanosecond to the sleek tablet still sitting on the table. Cain smiled, a thin, cold affair that held no warmth. "Please, Mr. Vance, don't insult my intelligence. We both know it's integrated into the chassis of that custom tablet, the one you never let out of your sight, the one with the biometric scanner that requires your living thumbprint to access. Hand it over." From her hiding spot, Ava analyzed the situation. The men were not common criminals. Their gear, their tactics, their discipline, it all pointed to elite special forces or intelligence training. They had taken control of a high-end, secure location in under 60 seconds without firing a single shot. They weren't here to make a scene. They were on a surgical mission, and they were succeeding. The patrons were frozen in fear, some huddled under their tables, others staring blankly, unable to process the violation of their sanctuary. The staff were equally terrified. Mr. Dubois was being held near the front door, his face ashen. Ava saw the young busboy, barely 17, trying to hide behind the bar, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold them still. She felt a strange detachment, the chaos sharpening her senses rather than dulling them. Her training was a cold, clear voice in the back of her mind, cutting through the fear. Assess. Adapt. Act. You are outnumbered. You are unarmed. Use the environment. Use their expectations. They see a waitress. They see a civilian. They see a woman. Good. Let them. Vance, desperate now, tried to bargain. "Look, whatever you want, I can pay. Millions. Tens of millions. Just to name your price." Cain leaned forward slightly, his grey eyes boring into Vance. "You built a system, Mr. Vance, that puts a price on everything. Privacy. Freedom. Human life. You sell it to the highest bidder. and you sleep soundly at night, convinced you're making the world a safer place. But you don't see the consequences. You don't see the blood on the balance sheets. I'm not here for your money. I'm here to collect a different kind of debt. The personal nature of the threat was now undeniable. Kane wasn't a corporate rival. He was a man with a vendetta, a ghost from Omnisight's bloody past. Ava knew she had a choice. She could stay hidden. She could wait for it to be over. They wanted Vance and his key. They would likely take it and leave. She could survive. She could keep her new life, her anonymity. All she had to do was nothing. But then her eyes fell on the young busboy again, crying silently behind the bar. She saw the terrified couple in the corner, holding each other as if it were their last night on Earth. She had spent 5 years running from the violence, trying to convince herself she was no longer that person. She had traded the battlefield for the dining room, the weight of a rifle for the weight of a silver tray. But watching this cold, clinical terror unfold, she realized the truth. You can't run from what you are. You can only suppress it. And her suppression was failing. The man guarding the kitchen door shifted his weight, his attention focused on the drama at table 7. His back was partially to her. It was a small opening, a tiny, reckless, suicidal window of opportunity. Her hand tightened on the tray. It was heavy, solid silver, with a raised edge. Not a weapon, but it could be. Her mind flashed through the possibilities. A distraction, a strike, the corkscrew in her apron pocket, the boiling water in the espresso machine behind the bar, the heavy butcher knives in the kitchen just through the doors he was guarding. She took a deep, silent breath, the air tasting of fear and expensive perfume. The waitress named Anna was fading. In her place, something cold, hard, and infinitely more dangerous was waking up. The decision, once made, was absolute. Ava's entire physiology shifted. Her breathing became slow and deliberate. Her muscles relaxed into a state of fluid readiness. The frantic drum of her heart slowed to a powerful, rhythmic beat. The world, which had been a cacophony of fear, narrowed to a single point of focus. The man guarding the kitchen doors. He was tall, lean, and hyper-aware, but his attention, like everyone else's, was a captive of the quiet confrontation between Kane and Vance. That was his mistake. He assumed the threats were all in front of him. Ava slid a heavy linen napkin from a nearby service station, wrapping it tightly around her left hand and forearm. It wasn't armor, but it would provide a crucial half-second of protection against a blade or a glancing blow. From her apron pocket, she slipped the sommelier's corkscrew. It was a waiter's friend style, solid steel, with a small, serrated blade for cutting foil and a sharp, spiraled worm. In her hand, it was no longer a tool for opening wine. It was a weapon of devastating potential. She held it low, concealed by her body. Her target was the service stand, 20 feet away, laden with silver cloches, water pitchers, and stacks of porcelain plates. It was her diversion. She pushed off from the partition, not running, but moving in a controlled, gliding walk. The same walk she used when carrying a full tray of cocktails through a crowded room. Her movements were non-threatening, unremarkable. She was just a waitress, moving from one station to another. The hostile's eyes flickered over her for a moment, registered her uniform, and dismissed her. It was the exact reaction she had counted on. 3 feet from the service stand, she tripped. It was a masterful piece of theatre. Her foot seemed to catch on the thick carpet, her body lurching forward with a small, helpless cry. The silver tray she was still carrying flew from her hands, spinning through the air and crashing into the service stand with an explosive clang of metal on metal and porcelain. Plates shattered, water pitchers toppled. The noise was deafening in the tomb-like silence of the restaurant. Every head, including Kane's and his men's, snapped towards the sound. For a single chaotic second, their focus was broken. And in that second, Ava moved. She didn't go for the man at the kitchen door. That was the expected play. Instead, she pivoted off her stumble, her body coiling like a spring, and launched herself at the second man, the one who had taken down Vance's bodyguard and was now standing guard over the main dining area. He was turning back from the distraction as she reached him. He saw a flash of black and white, a woman's face set in a mask of grim determination. He had no time to process it. Her left arm, wrapped in the napkin, shot up and deflected his instinctive move to draw his weapon. At the same time, her right hand, holding the corkscrew, struck. She didn't stab. She targeted the brachial plexus in his armpit, the worm of the corkscrew driving deep into the cluster of nerves. The man screamed, a raw, strangled sound of pure agony, his arm going instantly numb and useless. Before the scream had fully registered, Ava was in motion again. She spun with his momentum, her leg sweeping out and hooking behind his knee, destroying his balance. As he fell backwards, she brought the heel of her hand up in a brutal, precise strike under his chin. His head snapped back, his teeth clacking together with a sound like cracking walnuts. He was unconscious before he hit the floor. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. The restaurant, which had been silent with fear, was now silent with shock. The remaining 2 hostiles, Kane and the man at the kitchen door, stared in disbelief. Harrison Vance, his jaw hanging open, looked from the fallen man to the waitress, his brain unable to compute what he had just witnessed. This quiet, subservient woman, who had just been pouring his water, had dismantled a trained professional with a wine opener. The illusion was shattered. The waitress was gone. In her place stood Ava Petrova, her eyes cold and calculating, her posture that of a predator. Kine was the first to recover. The surprise on his face was replaced by a look of cold, professional respect. He slowly rose from his chair, his calm grey eyes now fixed on Ava with a newfound intensity. "Well," he said, his voice still unnervously level. "It seems you have a pest problem, Mr. Vance. One of your staff is more than she appears." The man at the kitchen door was not as calm. He had his weapon out now, a compact submachine gun with a suppressor, its muzzle wavering between Ava and the terrified diners. "Stay back!" he snarled, his discipline cracking under the shock. Ava didn't hesitate. She scooped up the gun dropped by the man she'd incapacitated. It was a Sig Sauer P320, lightweight and familiar in her hand. The weight of it was like a long-lost limb, being reattached. She didn't aim at the man. She aimed at the floor in front of him, firing 2 rounds in quick succession. The suppressed foot was soft, but the impact of the bullets chipping the marble floor was unmistakable. "Drop it," she commanded, her voice no longer the gentle murmur of a waitress, but a hard, clear command that cut through the fear. "You're not trained for this. You're part of a snatch-and-grab team. You're not equipped for a sustained firefight in a civilian area. Your partner is down. Your mission is compromised. Walk away." She was speaking their language. She wasn't just fighting them. She was deconstructing their operational parameters, showing them that she knew exactly who and what they were. Kine held up a hand, signaling his remaining man to hold his position. He studied Ava, a flicker of something, curiosity, recognition in his eyes. "You handle that weapon with familiarity. You know our tactics. You are no waitress." "I'm the person who's going to ruin your evening," Ava replied, her gun steady, her eyes never leaving him. For the first time, a genuine, mirthless smile touched Kane's lips. He looked from Ava to the terrified billionaire, then back to Ava. The dynamic in the room had irrevocably changed. It was no longer a simple hostage situation. It was a standoff, a professional against a professional, with the most powerful man in the city trapped between them. "This," Kyne said softly, almost to himself, "has just become significantly more interesting." The feel of the Sig Sauer in her hand was an unwelcome homecoming. The cold, textured grip, the balanced weight, the crisp click of the safety. It was a language her body had never forgotten. As she stood in a two-handed combat stance, the luxurious dining room of l'Orangerie dissolved, replaced by flashes of another life, a life of grit, shadow, and the constant metallic taste of adrenaline. Her name had not always been Eva Petrova, and it certainly hadn't been Anna. In the clandestine world she once inhabited, she had a designation: Echo. She was a field operative for Unit 734, a deniable operations group so secret that not even the CIA or MI6 would officially acknowledge its existence. It was a multinational ghost unit, funded through black budgets, tasked with solving problems that officially did not exist. They were the surgeons who worked in the dark, cutting out geopolitical cancers with ruthless precision. Her training hadn't taken place in a standard military boot camp. It was a brutal, Darwinian process, conducted at a black site in the desolate wilderness of the Yukon. They were taught more than just marksmanship and hand-to-hand combat. They were taught deception, infiltration, and survival in the most extreme environments. They learned to kill with anything from a garrote wire to a ballpoint pen. But more than that, they were taught to erase themselves, to become ghosts who could walk through walls, to shed identities like old skin. Eva had excelled. She had a natural aptitude for situational awareness, an almost precognitive ability to sense danger. Her instructors called it a high-threat acuity. She saw patterns where others saw chaos. It was this skill that made her one of Unit 734's most effective assets, the operative they sent in when a situation was deemed impossible. Her last mission was codenamed Seraph's Fall. The target was a rogue bioweapons scientist, Dr. Alhamdi, who was planning to sell a weaponized strain of Marburg virus to a terrorist cell in Odessa, Ukraine. The mission was simple on paper: infiltrate Alhamdi's compound, secure the virus samples, and eliminate him. Eva was part of a three-person team. The lead, a stoic ex-SS operator named Finch, and their tech specialist, a jittery but brilliant hacker from Mossad named Zev. The infiltration went perfectly. They moved like shadows through the pre-dawn fog, bypassing security systems and neutralizing guards with silent efficiency. They reached the subterranean lab where Alhamdi was preparing the transfer. The vials containing the virus were there, secured in a cryogenic container. Everything was going according to the plan. And then, the world fell apart. As Finch reached for the container, the lab doors slammed shut, and reinforced steel shutters covered the windows. The light switched to a harsh, red emergency glow. A voice, calm and synthesized, echoed from hidden speakers. "Your presence has been anticipated, Unit 734. A variable has been introduced into the equation. It was a trap. Their intel had been compromised. A firefight erupted, not against disorganized guards, but against a kill team that was every bit as skilled as they were. They used the same tactics, the same formations. It was like fighting their own reflection in a blood-spattered mirror." Zev was the first to fall, a single, precise shot to the head, taking him down as he tried to override the lockdown. Finch, providing covering fire, yelled for Eva to secure the asset. "Go, Echo! Get it out! That's the mission!" Eva grabbed the cryogenic container, the cold of it burning through her gloves. As she turned to find an escape route, she saw Finch take a round to the chest. He stumbled back, a look of shocked betrayal on his face as he stared not at the enemy kill team, but at the far wall. A hidden panel had slid open, and from it emerged a man in a pristine suit, holding a pistol. He wasn't one of Al-Hamdi's men. He was their extraction handler, a man from the agency known only as the Registrar. "I'm afraid the mission parameters have been updated, Finch," the Registrar said calmly, firing a second time. Finch collapsed. Ava stared in horror, understanding crashing down on her. This wasn't just a compromised mission. It was a purge. Unit 734 was being erased. The asset, the virus, was secondary. They were the primary targets. The Registrar's cold eyes found hers. "You, Echo. You were always the best. A shame. But loose ends must be tied." He raised his pistol. What happened next was a blur of pure survival instinct. Ava hurled the heavy cryogenic container at the Registrar, using his moment of surprise to dive for cover. She laid down a volley of suppressive fire, not to kill, but to create an escape route. She knew the compound schematics by heart. There was a ventilation shaft behind a steel maintenance grate. It was her only chance. Bullets chewed at the concrete around her as she sprinted. She felt a searing pain in her shoulder as a round grazed her. But she didn't slow down. She kicked the grate open and threw herself into the darkness of the shaft, a hail of bullets sparking against the metal behind her. She crawled for what felt like miles through the suffocating darkness, the sounds of the firefight fading. She emerged into a sewer system, wounded, disoriented, and utterly alone. Her team was dead. Her handler had betrayed her. Her organization, her entire life, had tried to kill her. Echo was a ghost now in every sense of the word. She was declared killed in action, another name etched onto a classified memorial wall that no one would ever see. From that day forward, she was no one. She used her emergency escape funds, a stash she had prepared against just such a contingency, to create a new identity. Ava Petrova, a refugee with a tragic, fabricated past. She drifted through Europe for 2 years, working menial jobs, always looking over her shoulder, haunted by the faces of Finch and Zev. Finally, she made her way to America, to the chaotic anonymity of New York City, believing that in a city of millions, one ghost could easily disappear. She had chosen the life of a waitress for its simplicity, its mundanity. The routine was a balm on her shattered nerves. The physical labor kept her tired, the endless stream of faces a distraction. For 5 years it had worked. The ghost had slept. Now, standing in l'Orangerie, the Sig Sauer firm in her grasp, she knew that sleep was over. And as she looked at Kane, at his professional calm, his tactical precision, and the cold certainty in his eyes, a terrifying thought surfaced. The men who had ambushed her team in Odessa had moved just like this. They had the same silent efficiency, the same air of being hunters, not thugs. Was it possible? Was this somehow connected? The past was not just a memory anymore. It was here, in this restaurant, holding a gun. And it had found her. The fragile truce, born of mutual shock, shattered. The hostel at the kitchen door, panicked by Ava's display, made a fatal error. He decided she was the primary threat and took his eyes off Kane for a fraction of a second to aim his weapon at her. "No," Kane commanded. But it was too late. Ava didn't need to think. Her body reacted on instinct, honed by 1,000 lethal simulations. She fired once. The suppressed round crossed the room and struck the man's weapon, the impact jarring it from his grasp. It was a disarmament shot, not a killing one, a deliberate choice to de-escalate if possible. But in the same instant, she dove to the side, rolling behind the solid oak of the main bar, just as he reflexively squeezed his own trigger. A burst of automatic fire ripped through the space where she had been standing, shredding a tapestry on the wall and sending terrified patrons screaming and scrambling for deeper cover. The restaurant erupted into chaos. "Hold your fire, you fool!" Kane roared, his composure finally cracking into fury. "The asset is in the line of fire!" He was referring to the Prometheus key, still sitting on Vance's table. From behind the bar, Ava's mind worked with chilling clarity. This was her arena now. They thought they controlled the space, but she was the one who knew its secrets. She had spent hundreds of hours polishing its glasses, stocking its shelves, and navigating its passages. The panicked gunman was fumbling to retrieve his weapon. Ava slid down the length of the bar, staying below the countertop. She grabbed 2 bottles of the most expensive single malt scotch, Glenfiddich, 50-year-old. She uncorked them silently, her movements deft. To her left was the dumbwaiter, a small, manually operated lift used to bring up supplies from the wine cellar. An idea, desperate and dangerous, took shape. She popped up from behind the bar for a split second, long enough to hurl the first bottle. It didn't fly toward the gunman. Instead, it sailed in a high arc and smashed against the large, ornate window overlooking the city. The sound of shattering glass created a new focal point of chaos, a new distraction. As the gunman and Keon glanced towards the window, Ava made her move. She shoved open the dumbwaiter door, slid inside the cramped space, and began lowering herself manually, her muscles straining against the rope and pulley system. Above her, she heard Keon shouting orders. "Forget the woman! Get the key! We're leaving!" The gunman, his nerve broken, scrambled toward table 7. Vance, paralyzed by fear, was a sitting duck. Ava knew she had seconds. She stopped the dumbwaiter halfway between floors, leaving her in the dark, narrow shaft. Poking her head up, she could see the scene through the opening at floor level, like watching a play from the orchestra pit. The gunman snatched the tablet from the table. "Got it!" he yelled. "Good," Kane's voice replied. "Now get to the exit. We're blowing the doors." Ava aimed carefully, her target not the man, but the tablet in his hand. It was a risky shot, but damaging the key was better than letting them escape with it. She took a breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the corner of the tablet. Sparks flew as it ricocheted off the hardened casing. The device flew from the gunman's hands, skittering across the marble floor and coming to a stop near the fallen bodyguard. The gunman howled in frustration and rage, turning his weapon towards the bar, where he thought she was still hiding, and unleashing a torrent of fire. The mahogany bar splintered, glasses exploded, and bottles of priceless liquor burst in clouds of fragrant mist. While he was distracted, Ava hoisted herself out of the dumbwaiter shaft and into the kitchen. The kitchen staff were huddled in a corner, their faces pale with terror. "Stay down! Stay quiet!" she commanded, in a low, authoritative voice that left no room for argument. They complied instantly. The kitchen was a wonderland of improvised weaponry, racks of razor-sharp knives, heavy cast-iron pans, vats of boiling water. But she needed something else. Speed. Surprise. Her eyes landed on the fire suppression system. Above the massive gas ranges were nozzles connected to a tank of CO2. A manual release valve was on the wall. Another reckless idea sparked. She grabbed a heavy cleaver, not as a weapon, but as a tool. Back in the dining room, the gunman was advancing on the fallen tablet. Kane was providing cover, his own pistol now drawn, his eyes scanning for Ava. Ava crept to the swinging kitchen doors. She could see the gunman's feet as he bent down to retrieve the key. She took a deep breath. She had one chance. She kicked the door open with all her force and threw the cleaver. It wasn't an aimed, lethal throw. It was designed to make noise, to draw the eye. The heavy blade spun end over end, clattering loudly against the far wall. As both men turned towards the sound, Ava sprinted from the kitchen in the opposite direction, towards the main dining area. She was a blur of motion. She vaulted over a table, sending plates and glasses crashing to the floor, and slid across the polished marble, grabbing the tablet from under the gunman's nose. She came up into a crouch, the Prometheus key in one hand, her pistol in the other. She was now in the center of the room, completely exposed. Kane and his man had her bracketed. "Nowhere left to run," Kane stated, his pistol aimed squarely at her chest. "You're impressive, I'll grant you that. But you're one woman against two. Drop the key." Harrison Vance, who had been cowering under his table, watched the scene unfold, his mind reeling. The world he knew, a world of numbers, contracts, and calculated risks, had been replaced by this brutal, primal ballet of violence. And at its center was his waitress. The woman he wouldn't have given a second glance to was now holding the fate of his entire empire in her hand, staring down two trained killers with an unnerving calm. He felt a profound and unfamiliar emotion. Utter helplessness. His money, his power, they were meaningless here. He was just a spectator in a war he didn't understand. Ava's eyes flicked between Kane and the other gunman. Her heart was pounding, a wild drum against her ribs. She was out of tricks, out of cover. But she wasn't out of fight. "You're right," she said, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "But you're making the same mistake he did." She nodded towards the unconscious man on the floor. "You think you know what you're dealing with. You don't." She feigned a move to her left, drawing their aim. Then, in a motion so fast it was almost a suggestion, she dropped flat to the floor, tucking into a roll as their bullets flew over her head. She came up firing, not at them, but at the massive, multi-tiered chandelier in the center of the room. She put 3 rounds into the thick chain that held it to the ceiling. With a groan of protesting metal, the 1,000-pound monstrosity of crystal and brass began to fall. It didn't just drop, it swung like a pendulum, crashing through the center of the dining room, sweeping tables, chairs, and everything else aside in a tidal wave of destructive chaos. It was the ultimate environmental weapon, a symphony of destruction she had just conducted with 3 well-placed shots. And in the ensuing mayhem of shattering crystal and screaming patrons, she vanished. The crash of the chandelier was apocalyptic. It plunged half the room into darkness and sent a shockwave of dust and glittering debris through the air. For a moment, the world was a maelstrom of noise and confusion. Ava used that moment to melt into the shadows of the restaurant's wine cellar, having slipped through the dumbwaiter access in the kitchen during the chaos. The cellar was cool and damp, the air thick with the earthy smell of old vintages and wet stone. Racks of priceless bottles stretched into the darkness like sleeping soldiers. It was a temporary reprieve, a place to think. She clutched the Prometheus key, the tablet, to her chest. It was surprisingly heavy, dense with technology and secrets. Her shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed her in Odessa, a phantom pain awakened by the memory of combat. She heard movement from the dining room above, shouting, Kane restoring order. They would be looking for her. They wouldn't leave without the key. This wasn't over. Suddenly, a voice cut through the silence of the cellar, startling her. "Impressive." Ava spun around, leveling her pistol. Kane was standing at the bottom of the stone staircase that led down from the kitchen, partially obscured by the shadows. He wasn't aiming his weapon. It was held loosely at his side. His remaining man was nowhere to be seen. "My associate is securing the perimeter upstairs," Kane said, his voice conversational, as if they were discussing the quality of the wine. "He has Mr. Vance, so we can dispense with the heroics. It's just you and me now." Ava's finger tightened on the trigger. "Stay where you are." Kane took another slow step into the dim light, his hands held open in a gesture of peace. "I recognized your style, you know. Up there, the efficiency, the way you use the environment, the ruthlessness. There weren't many instructors at the Yukon facility who taught those specific techniques. Finch was one. I was the other. The Yukon facility. The name hit Ava like a physical blow. It was the black site, her training ground, the place where Echo was forged. "That's impossible," she whispered, her mind refusing to accept it. "My designation was Karen," he said, and the final piece of the puzzle slotted into place with sickening certainty. Karen was the lead instructor for CQC and tactical improvisation, a legendary, almost mythical figure at the facility, known for his brutal training scenarios and his ice-cold demeanor. He had been a mentor to Finch. He had personally overseen Ava's final field certification. You were one of us," Ava said, the gun in her hand suddenly feeling immensely heavy. "I was," Kine Corran replied, a deep sadness entering his voice. "Until the mission in Odessa. Until Seraph's fall. You know about that." "I planned it," he said, and the confession hung in the air between them. Not the ambush, the mission itself. The intel about Al-Hamdi was solid. What I didn't know was that the registrar was playing a different game. He was cleaning house. Unit 734 had become too effective, too independent. A liability. He fed your position to a rival agency's kill team and went in personally to oversee the purge. Ava felt the floor shift beneath her feet. The narrative of her life, the story of betrayal that had driven her into hiding, was being rewritten. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because of him," Karen said, his voice hardening with a cold, pure hatred. He gestured vaguely towards the ceiling, towards the dining room where Harrison Vance was being held. "Because of Omnisite. The registrar was on Vance's payroll. The rival agency he used? They were Vance's corporate security, a mercenary group with a fancy name. Vance wanted a live field test for a new predictive tracking algorithm. Unit 734 was the guinea pig. Your team was hunted and killed as a product demonstration." The horror of it washed over Ava, a nauseating tide. Finch and Zev hadn't just been betrayed. They had been sacrificed on the altar of corporate greed. Their deaths were a data point in a sales pitch. "I was stateside when it happened," Karen continued, his eyes locking onto hers. "By the time I realized what was going on, it was too late. They listed you as KIA. I knew it was a lie. The registrar is meticulous. If he couldn't confirm your death, he would hunt you forever. So I buried myself. I let them think I accepted the official story, and I started digging." He took another step closer. "That's what brought me here, Echo. This isn't about revenge for me. Not just revenge, it's about justice. The Prometheus key isn't just the source code for Omnisite. Vance is arrogant. He's a narcissist. He kept records. Every illegal sale, every backroom deal, every life his software destroyed. He called it his devil's ledger. Proof of his power, his influence. It's all on there. The order to use Unit 734 as lab rats, the payment to the registrar, the identities of the kill team, everything." He stopped, standing no more than 15 feet from her. "I'm not going to sell it. I'm going to release it. I'm going to burn Harrison Vance's empire to the ground and expose every last corrupt official and shadow broker he's in bed with. I'm going to get justice for Finch and Zev." Ava stared at him, her world completely upended. For 5 years, she had been running from a ghost. Now she was face to face with a man offering her the one thing she thought she would never have again, a reason, a purpose. But his path was paved with violence. He had terrorized a room full of innocent people. His man was holding a gun to Vance's head upstairs. "You're asking me to trust you," she said, her voice strained. "To hand over the one thing that's keeping me alive." "I'm asking you to help me finish our last mission," he corrected her gently. "Vance isn't the victim here. He's the monster. Look at what he made us. Look at what he did to our family. You can stay Anna the waitress, spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for the registrar's ghosts to find you. Or you can be Echo again, just for one more night. You can help me light a fire that will expose them all, a fire so bright they'll have nowhere left to hide." He held out his hand. "Give me the key, Echo. Let's give them the justice they deserve." The choice laid bare before her was impossible. On one side, the man who had ordered the death of her team, a symbol of the corrupt, untouchable power she despised. On the other, her former mentor, a man seeking a righteous vengeance through brutal means. She was caught between two devils, holding the ledger of their sins in her hand. Protecting Vance meant protecting a system that had murdered her friends. Helping Karen meant endorsing his terror. Her training had prepared her for anything except this. It had taught her how to kill, how to survive, how to disappear. It had never taught her how to choose the lesser of two evils when both were monstrous. The silence in the wine cellar stretched, thick with the weight of years of secrets and blood. Ava looked at the man she once knew as Karen, the mentor who had shaped her, and then at the tablet in her hand, the devil's ledger. His cause was just. His methods were not. If she gave him the key, his crusade would expose Vance, but it would also legitimize the terror he had inflicted on the innocents upstairs. He would become the very monster he was fighting. Her training offered no protocol for this moral labyrinth, but it had given her something else, the ability to forge a third option where none existed. "No," she said, her voice ringing with newfound finality. Caron's face hardened, the hope in his eyes dying, replaced by a weary disappointment. "So you choose him? The man who signed your death warrant?" "I don't choose him," Ava countered, taking a step back, her pistol still trained on him. "And I don't choose you. You talk about justice for Finch and Zev, but look at what you've become. You're using their memory to justify terrorizing civilians. They wouldn't have wanted this. Justice and revenge are not the same thing." "They are the only thing I have left," Karen roared, his control finally snapping. He lunged, not for her, but for a heavy wine rack to his side. With a grunt of effort, he sent the massive wooden structure toppling towards her, a cascade of shattering bottles and expensive wine. Ava dove away, the crashing rack missing her by inches. She came up from her roll as Karen charged through the debris, his face a mask of desperate fury. The time for words was over. The fight was brutal and intimate, a whirlwind of motion in the confined space. It wasn't a brawl. It was a dark, violent dance between two masters of the same lethal art. They moved with a terrifying symmetry, each anticipating the other's moves, each countering with practiced efficiency. A block became a joint lock, a strike became a throw. They were perfectly matched, two sides of the same tarnished coin. Karen was stronger, his blows landing with bruising force, but Ava was faster, more fluid, using his aggression against him. She ducked under a sweeping hook and drove the butt of her pistol into his ribs, eliciting a sharp gasp of pain. He retaliated with a leg sweep that sent her stumbling back into a stone wall. He closed the distance, his hands reaching for her throat. "I don't want to kill you, Echo," he rasped, his face inches from hers. "You won't get the chance," she replied, and slammed her forehead into the bridge of his nose. He staggered back, momentarily stunned, blood pouring from his nostrils. It was the opening she needed. She didn't press the attack. Instead, she turned and sprinted for the stairs. She burst back into the kitchen, the tablet clutched under her arm. Karen's man was there, dragging a terrified Harrison Vance towards the service exit. He turned in surprise, raising his weapon. Ava was faster. She fired twice. The first bullet took him in the knee, the second in the shoulder. He collapsed, screaming, dropping his gun. Vance stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. You saved me." Ava ignored him. She grabbed a heavy-duty zip tie from a utility hook and secured the wounded man's hands. Just then, Karen emerged from the cellar stairs, his face bloody, but his eyes burning with resolve. "It's over," Ava said, her gun now aimed at him. Police sirens began to wail in the distance, a rising chorus that signaled the end of their isolated war. Someone must have finally been able to make a call. Karen looked from Ava to his wounded man, to the approaching sound of the sirens. He knew he was beaten. He slowly raised his hands in surrender. The police swarmed the restaurant moments later. The scene they found was one of surreal carnage: a fallen chandelier, terrified patrons, a wounded gunman, a captured leader, and a billionaire huddled in a corner. But the woman at the center of it all, the waitress in the simple black uniform, was gone. While the first responders were focused on securing the hostiles and evacuating the patrons, Ava had slipped out through a rear delivery entrance, melting into the labyrinthine alleys of New York City. She had the Prometheus key. An hour later, from a payphone in a deserted subway station, she made a call. Not to the police, but to a number she had memorized years ago, the private, encrypted line of a fiercely independent investigative journalist named Michael Corrigan, a man who feared no one and could not be bought. "Corrigan," a gruff voice answered. "I'm sending you a package," Ava said, her voice disguised. "It contains a story that will burn down an empire. The keyword to decrypt is Seraph's Fall." She hung up before he could reply. She wiped the tablet clean of her fingerprints, packaged it, and sent it via a secure courier service to Corrigan's office. Her part was done. Justice would come, not from the barrel of a gun in a dark cellar, but under the harsh, cleansing light of public exposure. Vance's empire would crumble. The registrar and his shadowy network would be hunted. The truth about Unit 734 would be revealed. Ava Petrova walked out of the subway station and into the cool night air. She was a ghost again, with no name and no home. The quiet life she had built was a pile of ash. But for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't running from her past. She had confronted it, and in doing so, had honored the memory of her fallen comrades in a way that revenge never could. She didn't know where she would go next, what new identity she would have to build. All she knew was that the silence she walked into was no longer one of fear, but of peace. The waitress was gone. Echo had completed her mission. The story of Anna the waitress is a chilling reminder that the quietest people often carry the loudest pasts, and that true strength is not the power you flaunt, but the skill you hold in reserve. Harrison Vance's world was saved and shattered by the very person he deemed invisible. It forces us to ask, who are the unnoticed heroes and hidden threats we walk past every single day? What secrets lie dormant behind a polite smile or a simple uniform? If this story of unexpected heroism and dark secrets gripped you, please show your support by hitting that like button. It truly helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who loves a story with twists they'll never see coming. And most importantly, if you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into a story that will leave you questioning everything. Thank you for listening.